The banquet hall shimmered with the glow of chandeliers, their light dancing on crystal glasses, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and lavender centerpieces. But I stood near the dessert table, my hands smoothing my emerald dress, my auburn hair streaked with white, pinned loosely, my green eyes scanning a crowd that didn't see me. My retirement gala, meant to honor 30 years teaching history, felt like a stage where I was the forgotten prop, my name on a gold plaque no one read. At 62, I'd poured my heart into classrooms, my son James, my late husband Robert. But tonight, colleagues laughed, clinked glasses, and passed by the display of my old lesson plans, their voices drowning out the soft piano I'd chosen. The room hummed with chatter, but I was a ghost, my milestone fading into their stories. James was there, near the bar, his suit crisp, his laugh loud as he swapped stories with a stranger, his phone glowing in his hand. My colleagues, faces I'd known for decades, nodded politely but didn't linger, their eyes on younger teachers or the open bar. I'd spent days planning this, choosing the menu, curating photos of my classes, hoping they'd see the Helen who shaped minds. But the photos sat untouched, the cake uncut. I sipped my wine, its tang sharp, my smile tight, my heart heavy like the velvet curtains framing the room. I'd given everything, thinking it would hold me up. But tonight, it felt like I'd poured myself out until I was empty. I slipped to a quiet corner, the carpet soft under my heels, the air cooler away from the crowd, carrying a faint whiff of wax from the candles. My fingers brushed the silver bracelet Robert gave me, its cool links a reminder of his voice. "You're my lighthouse, Helen." He'd seen me, always. But without him, and now with James's laughter echoing, I felt like the teacher who planned, the mother who waited, the widow who vanished. I'd built a life for others, but tonight I was just the woman who organized the gala no one truly attended for her. "You okay, Mom?" James called, weaving through the crowd, his tie loose, his smile quick but distracted. Him. "Fine, dear," I said, my voice thin, forcing a nod. "Just taking a moment." "Great party," he said, already turning back, his phone buzzing. I smiled to the air, my throat tight, the wine glass cold in my hand. Great Helen. Always fine, always there, never truly noticed. I stepped outside, the night air crisp, carrying the scent of street pavement and distant salt from the harbor nearby. The stars were faint, dimmed by streetlights, and I leaned against a stone pillar, its surface rough under my palm. I caught my reflection in a window, lined face, green eyes tired but sharp, a woman who'd given her heart to a world that moved on without her. I thought of my mother, her hands kneading dough, her voice saying, "Find your own light, Helen." I'd forgotten that, buried under years of lesson plans and parenting. This gala was meant to celebrate me, but it showed me how small I'd become, not to them, but to myself. I walked to the harbor, the cobblestones uneven under my heels, the air sharper with salt and seaweed. I thought of Robert, how we'd walk coastal paths, his hand warm in mine, the sea's rhythm steady. I'd loved its wild calm, but I'd stopped seeking it, too busy with James, with teaching, to feel alive. Here, with the gala's noise fading, I felt a spark, small but real. I wasn't enough to them, not to James, not to my colleagues, but I could be enough for me. I'd read about Saltwind, a coastal town hours away, with quiet shores and simple streets. It was a whim, a whisper, but it felt like a call to start again. I returned to the hall, the chandelier's glow spilling out, but it wasn't my light anymore. I wasn't angry, just clear. I'd been waiting for them to see me, to give back the worth I'd poured into their lives. They hadn't, and maybe they wouldn't. I thought of my mother again, her voice steady. Go find your shore, Helen. I'd dimmed myself too long, shrinking to fit their needs. Now, with the stars above and the bracelet cool against my wrist, I felt ready to try. I didn't know what Saltwind held, but I was done being the unseen teacher, the forgotten mother. I was Helen, and I was ready to find her again. The living room was hushed, lit only by a single table lamp, its warm glow spilling over a coffee table cluttered with old history textbooks and a faded photo of Robert and me on a coastal cliff, the air carrying the faint scent of chamomile tea I'd brewed to steady my nerves. At 62, I'd spent decades in this house, teaching, raising James, loving Robert. But last night's retirement gala, its chatter bypassing me, my lesson plans ignored, had left me feeling like a name on a plaque, not a woman with a pulse. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was loose, brushing my shoulders, my green eyes catching the lamp's light, and I wore a soft shawl over a cotton nightgown, its hem worn from sleepless nights. I was ready to find Helen again, not just the teacher, the mother, the widow who'd faded. I opened the photo album, its pages crinkling, and traced a picture of Robert and me, his arm around me, the sea wild behind us. My throat tightened, remembering his laugh, his voice saying, "You're my lighthouse, Helen." I'd been his light, James's, my students, thinking love meant giving all of myself. But last night, standing alone by the dessert table, I'd felt dim, like a candle burned too low. I thought of my mother, her hands rolling dough, her voice saying, "Keep a piece of you, Helen." I ignored her, too busy grading papers and planning James's life. But now, with the gala's echo, I wanted that piece back. I pulled a suitcase from the closet, its leather cool and stiff, and packed carefully. Cardigans, skirts, a sketchbook I hadn't touched since Robert's death, each item a quiet vow. The act felt daring, like when I'd sneak to the coast with Robert, his hand warm, the waves crashing. But this was for me, not him, not James, not my students. I'd read about Saltwind, a coastal town hours away, with sandy shores and quiet cafes. It was a name, a memory of Robert's stories, but it felt like a call, offering space to find Helen, the woman I'd buried under years of duty. "You're up early," James said, his voice soft from the hallway, his silhouette in pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. He'd stayed over after the gala, his concern a weight I both loved and resisted. "I'm packing," I said, folding a scarf, my voice firm but kind. "I'm going to Saltwind." He frowned, stepping closer. "Mom, this is sudden. You sure about this?" I nodded, my smile small but steady. His worry was sweet, but it came too late, like a wave after the tide had turned. He hugged me, brief and warm, then left, promising to call, leaving me with the suitcase and my resolve. I sat at the kitchen table, the tea's steam curling, the air cool with the scent of chamomile and old wood. I opened my sketchbook, its pages blank but inviting, and drew a simple wave, the pencil scratch a quiet promise. I thought of Robert, how he'd call me his sea light for shining through storms. I'd forgotten how to shine for myself, caught up in lesson plans, James's milestones, widowhood's quiet grief. But Saltwind, with its promise of open shores and new mornings, felt like a place I could try. I walked to the window, the glass cool against my palm, the yard dark beyond. The stars were faint, hidden by city lights, but steady, like Robert's hand on mine years ago, saying, "You're stronger than you know, Helen." I'd smiled, thinking he was teasing, but now, with the suitcase packed and the gala's sting fading, I believed him. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, a life where I could be more than the teacher who planned, the mother who waited. I carried the suitcase to my car, the driveway's gravel crunching under my slippers, the night air sharp with pine and distant salt. The engine hummed as I started it, a sound both familiar and thrilling. I thought of James, his distracted smile at the gala, his life full without me. I loved him, always would, but I couldn't keep dimming for him. I'd call, I'd visit, but first I needed to find myself, to see if Helen was still there, under the years of giving. I drove into the night, the road open, the headlights slicing through the dark. The radio played softly, an old song Robert loved, and I hummed along, my voice rusty, but mine. Saltwind was hours away, a dot on the map, but it felt like a beginning. I didn't know what I'd find. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I was ready to look. The stars faded as the sky lightened, and I felt a spark, small but fierce, like I was waking up after a long, quiet sleep. The Saltwind coast stretched before me, its sandy shore kissed by waves that hissed softly, their foam curling like lace, the air sharp with the scent of seaweed and salt, mingling with the distant cry of gulls. At 62, I'd never traveled alone like this, and this coastal town, with its weathered boardwalk and shingled cottages, felt like a new world, both thrilling and unsteady. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, my green eyes scanning the horizon, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton blouse and skirt, my hands gripping a small suitcase, fingers stiff from the long drive. I'd left after my retirement gala left me unseen, and now, in Saltwind, I was searching for Helen, the woman I dimmed under decades of giving. I found my rental, a small cottage with peeling blue paint and a porch facing the sea, its railings splintered but sturdy under my touch. The key was under a mat, and the door groaned as I opened it, revealing a cozy room smelling of cedar and faint lavender from a bowl of potpourri. The furniture was simple, a faded armchair, a wooden table with scratches, a bed with a quilt patched in blues. I set my suitcase down, the floorboards creaking, and ran my fingers along a windowsill. Its paint chipped, but smooth. This wasn't home, but it was a space to breathe, a place where I could be more than the teacher who planned, the mother who waited, the widow who faded. I walked into town, the boardwalk warm under my sandals, the air alive with the crash of waves and the tang of salt. The main street was quiet but welcoming, a cafe with checkered curtains, a bookstore with a driftwood sign, a dock where fishing boats swayed, their ropes humming in the breeze. I stopped at the bookstore, its window displaying sketchbooks with seashell covers, and bought one, its pages crisp under my fingers. I thought of Robert, how he'd loved the coast, pulling me to watch the sunset, his voice warm. "See the light, Helen? It's yours." I'd stopped seeing light after he died, too busy with James and my students. But now, with the sea's rhythm in my ears, I wanted to try again. "New to Saltwind?" asked a voice. It was Sarah, a bookstore owner in her 60s with warm hazel eyes and a salt and pepper braid. Her hands arranging books, her apron dusted with sand. "Just arrived," I said, my voice hesitant, clutching the sketchbook. "Looking for something different." "Saltwind's good for different," she said, her smile gentle. "It listens to you." I nodded, her words settling like a shell in my pocket, and walked on, the town's hum soft behind me. I found a cafe by the dock, its windows streaked with sea mist, and ordered tea, its warmth soothing as I sat at a wooden table, its surface sticky with salt. The air smelled of brewed leaves and fried fish, and I opened my sketchbook, drawing a wave, the pencil scratch a quiet comfort. The town moved around me, fishermen laughing, a child chasing a gull, and I felt out of place, my hat too neat, my hands too soft, but there was freedom in being unknown, no one expecting me to grade papers or host dinners. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's murmur steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. The sky was turning orange, the stars just visible, and I thought of James, his distracted glance at the gala, his life full without me. I'd left a note saying I'd call, but part of me wondered if he'd noticed I was gone. Here, though, with the sea's gentle song, I didn't need his eyes to feel alive. I was starting to see myself, not as the mother who gave, but as Helen, who could create. I opened my sketchbook again, the bracelet from Robert cool against my wrist, its silver glinting. I drew the dock, its ropes taut, and Sarah's words echoing, "It listens to you." I thought of my mother, how she'd loved the coast, saying, "Find your tide, Helen, it's waiting." I wasn't sure I belonged here yet, but I was willing to try. The sea stretched wide before me, its waves alive, and I felt a spark, small but real. I was afraid, but I was in Saltwind, and that was enough for now. The Saltwind shore stretched wide, its sand warm beneath my bare feet, waves whispering as they curled in, their foam catching the morning sun, the air sharp with salt, and the sweet tang of wild honeysuckle growing along the dunes. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for a week, and its rhythm, the sea's steady pulse, the gulls' soft cries, was kindling a warmth I hadn't felt since Robert's days. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was loose, brushing my neck, my green eyes tracing the water's edge, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton blouse and skirt, my hands holding my sketchbook, its pages now flecked with pencil marks. I'd come the salt wind after my retirement gala left me invisible, and now, with the sea's calm, I was finding small joys to claim as Helen, not just the teacher who gave everything. I stopped by a cluster of smooth shells, their surfaces cool and ridged, and sat on a driftwood bench, its wood bleached by salt and sun. I opened my sketchbook, drawing the waves' curves, the pencil's scratch blending with the sea's murmur. The act felt like reclaiming a piece of me, a way to see through my eyes, not James's needs or my students' demands. I thought of Robert, how we'd walk this coast, his laugh warm as he'd say, "Find the beauty, Helen, it's everywhere." I'd stopped looking for beauty after he died, too busy grading papers and parenting, but now, with the sea's rhythm in my heart, I felt it again, faint but alive. I wandered into town, the boardwalk warm under my sandals, the air carrying the rich scent of fresh scones from a bakery. I stopped there, its windows fogged with warmth, and ordered a cranberry scone, its buttery flakes melting on my tongue. The counter was worn, grounding under my fingers, and I sketched the bakery sign, its letters faded but proud. The simplicity of it, the scone, the sketchbook, the sea's distant hum, felt like a gift, a way to choose joy for myself, not just serve it to others. I thought of my mother, her hands kneading dough, her voice saying, "Hold the sweet things, Helen, they're yours." I was holding them now, small but bright, like shells on the shore. "You're getting the hang of this place," Sarah said, the bookstore owner, her salt and pepper braids swinging as she carried a tray of muffins, her smile warm.
She sat across from me, her apron dusted with flour. "Trying to," I said, showing her my sketchbook, my voice lighter than I expected. "Salt wind's opening me up." "The sea does that," she said, her eyes crinkling. "It knows how to teach." Her words settled like a wave's soft foam, and I nodded, grateful for her warmth. I spent the afternoon exploring, the town revealing itself in quiet wonders, a gull soaring above the dock, the scent of lavender from a shop's open door, the sea's steady pulse. I stopped by a coastal path, its edges lined with dune grass, their blades swaying in the breeze. I leaned against a weathered fence, its wood cool under my palms, and watched the waves shimmer, their crests catching the sun. I thought of James, his distracted glance at the gala, his life moving on. I'd left a note and he hadn't called yet, but here, with the sea's rhythm, I didn't need his eyes to feel real. I was starting to see Helen, the woman who sketched, who tasted scones, who walked alone and felt alive. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's murmur soft, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. I opened my sketchbook and drew the path, its grasses delicate but stubborn, like the woman I was becoming. I sketched the scone, the sea, Sarah's words, each line a step toward claiming this place. I thought of Robert again, how he loved my quiet moments, calling them my sea light glow. I thought my glow was in giving, but now I saw it could be this, choosing to notice, to sketch, to keep something for myself. The stars came out, sharp against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt from the cottage around my shoulders. Saltwind wasn't home yet, but it was a place where I could grow, where I could find joy in small things, a sketchbook, a scone, a kind word. I wasn't whole, but I was closer, and that was enough for now. The sea sang its gentle song, its waves steady, and I smiled, my pencil still in hand, ready for whatever came next.
The salt wind dock stretched over the sea, its weathered planks creaking under my sandals, the air alive with the tang of salt and the faint musk of drying fishing nets, gulls wheeling overhead with sharp cries. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for 2 weeks, and its rhythm, the waves' steady crash, the hum of boats, woven itself into me, kindling a sense of belonging I hadn't felt since Robert's days. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was tied back with a scarf, my green eyes catching the sunlight, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton blouse and skirt, my hands holding my sketchbook, its pages now lined with waves and shells. I'd come to Saltwind after my retirement gala left me unseen, and now, with the sea's calm and new faces, I was finding not just joy, but connection, a place for Helen to grow. I walked to the general store, its bell tinkling as I entered, the air warm with the scent of coffee and cedar. Sarah, the bookstore owner, was there, her salt and pepper braid neat, her smile welcoming as she sorted books. She'd become a steady presence, her shop a daily stop, her warmth easing me open. I bought a postcard with a sea view, its colors bold, and sat at a counter, sketching the dock's lines. The act was becoming a ritual, a way to claim Saltwind as mine, not as the teacher who graded or the mother who planned, but as Helen who could belong. I wandered to the dock later where boats bobbed, their hulls creaking. There I met Amos, a retired fisherman in his late 60s, his face weathered like driftwood, his chuckle soft as he mended nets, his flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. I paused, drawn to his quiet calm, and sketched his hands, their lines like the sea's ripples. I thought of Robert, how he loved watching fishermen saying, "They know the sea's heart, Helen." I'd stopped seeking hearts after he died, too busy with James and my students. But now, with Amos's steady work and the sea's hum, I felt them stirring again. Got a knack for that, Amos said, nodding at my sketchbook, his voice low, his eyes kind under a worn cap. Just practicing, I said, my voice shy but warm, showing him the page. It's new for me. New keeps you young, he said, his smile crinkling his face. Keep at it. His words landed softly, like a pebble in the tide. And I smiled, feeling seen in a way I hadn't at the gala. Sarah joined us later, her apron swapped for a shawl, and we sat on a bench, the dock's wood warm under us, the air carrying the scent of fish and salt. They shared stories, her bookstore's history, his years on the water, and I listened, my sketchbook open, feeling a spark of belonging. I told them about the gala, how my lesson plan sat untouched, my voice steady but tinged with old hurt. They nodded, their eyes gentle, not judging, but understanding. And I felt a weight lift, like I wasn't just the teacher who planned or the mother who waited, but someone who could be known. I walked back to the cottage, the sun high, the air warm with the scent of dune grass and salt. The town was alive, children laughing, boats humming, and I felt part of it, not just a visitor. I thought of James, how he had called yesterday, his voice brief, asking if I was okay. I had said yes, but I hadn't told him how Saltwind was waking me, how Sarah's smile and Amos's quiet wisdom were showing me I could be more than the teacher, the mother, the widow. I had spent years giving my light to others, thinking it was enough. But here, with new faces, I was learning to shine for myself. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's murmur soft, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. I opened my sketchbook and drew Amos's hands, Sarah's warmth, the way the sea felt like a friend. I thought of my mother, her voice saying, "Find your people, Helen. They'll hold you." I was finding them now, and Saltwind's small moments, and the kindness of strangers who saw me, not for what I did, but for who I was. The stars came out, bright against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. Saltwind was becoming a home, not just a place, and these people, Sarah, Amos, were its heartbeat. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, my heart lighter, as Amos said. The sea sang its steady song, and I smiled, my pencil still in hand, ready for whatever came next. The warm Saltwind cottage was dim that evening, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and the musty tang of an old letter I'd found tucked in a drawer, its envelope creased and addressed to me in James's familiar scrawl. A storm churned outside, waves crashing hard against the shore, rain drumming on the roof. And I sat at the wooden table, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the letter, its ink smudged but legible. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for 3 weeks, finding light in Sarah's kindness, Amos's wisdom, and my sketchbook. But this letter, from James, written years ago and never sent, stirred a pain I'd buried since Robert's death. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was loose, my green eyes misty, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton dress. The silver bracelet from Robert cool against my wrist, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the page. The letter was short, raw, written when James was in college, his words heavy with anger and grief. He'd felt I'd given too much to my students, too little to him after Robert died. My throat tightened as I read, remembering his teenage silences, his quick exits from our home. I thought I was being strong, teaching late, cooking his meals, keeping Robert's memory alive. But James had seen absence, a mother who shone for others but dimmed at home. The gala, with its ignored lesson plans, had shown me I'd faded, and now with this letter's weight, I saw I'd lost not just myself, but my son, too. I thought of Robert, how he'd nudge me to talk to James, saying, "He needs your heart, Helen." I'd tried, but I'd buried my own heart, too busy giving to others. I stood, the chair scraping the floor, and walked to the window, the glass cold and streaked with rain. The sea roared beyond, its surface dark and wild, mirroring the ache in my chest. I'd poured myself out, grading papers, raising James alone, loving Robert, thinking it was love, but it had left me hollow, a lighthouse with no beam. The letter reminded me of the Helen I'd been, vibrant, laughing with James on the beach, but also of the years I'd spent as the widow who grieved alone, the mother who gave but didn't connect. Saltwind was helping me find myself, but this letter was a wave, dragging me back to old wounds. "You holding up in this storm?" Amos called, his voice muffled through the door, his raincoat dripping as he stood on the porch, his weathered face kind under a soaked cap. He'd stopped by to check on me, his presence steady like the dock's planks. "It's stirring up old things," I said, holding the letter, my voice thin against the rain's roar. "From my son." He nodded, his eyes gentle. "The sea pulls up what's buried. Let it settle." His words were simple, like a buoy in the storm, and I smiled faintly as he left, promising coffee tomorrow. I sat again, the lamp's light soft, and held the letter, its words a bittersweet mirror. I thought of the gala, how I'd felt invisible, and James's brief call, his voice distant. I'd given him everything thinking it was love, but the letter showed I'd given myself away, too, even to him who needed me most. Saltwind, Sarah's warmth, Amos's quiet wisdom, and my sketchbook was teaching me I could be more than duty. I wasn't erasing Robert or James, but I was learning to carry them differently, to make room for Helen, the mother, the woman who could still shine. I opened my sketchbook, the storm's howl softening, and drew the sea's wild waves, the pencil's lines jagged but honest. The act felt like a bridge, linking my past to this moment, regret to hope. I thought of James again, how we'd build sandcastles, his last bright, my voice saying, "You're enough, Helen, just you." I thought my worth was in giving, but now I saw it could be in remembering and reaching out. I wasn't ready to call him yet, but the thought felt closer, like a star piercing the clouds. The rain slowed, the air cooler now, carrying the scent of wet cedar and salt sea. I stepped onto the porch, the quilt around my shoulders, the sea's rhythm steady despite the storm. Saltwind wasn't a cure, but it was a place where I could face my ghosts and still find light. Sarah's smile, Amos's kindness, my own lines in my sketchbook. I wasn't free of the past, but I was stronger, ready to keep going, to find the woman I was meant to be. The Saltwind coastal path meandered through dune grass, their blades whispering in the breeze, the air thick with the scent of sea salt and the faint sweetness of blooming beach roses, the sand cool beneath my bare feet. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for a month, finding light in Sarah's warmth, Amos's wisdom, and my sketches. But James's old letter, unearthed last night, had stirred me to look deeper, to uncover the Helen I'd lost under years of giving. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was tied back with a scarf, my green eyes tracing the sea's gentle waves, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton blouse and slacks, my hands holding my sketchbook, its pages now thick with lines. The retirement gala had shown me I'd faded, and now with the sea's steady rhythm, I was peeling back layers of sacrifice to find who remained. I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the sea, its wood smooth from years of salt and wind, and opened my sketchbook, drawing the dune's curves, the pencil scratch blending with the wave's soft crash. The act was a mirror, showing me a woman who'd poured herself into others, teaching late, cooking for James, loving Robert, thinking it was love, but losing herself in the process. James's letter, raw with his college-age hurt, reminded me of the Helen I'd been, laughing, building sandcastles with him, but also of the years I'd buried her under lesson plans, family dinners, and grief, becoming the steady one who never asked for more. I thought of Robert, his hand on mine by the sea, saying, "You're my sea light, Helen. Don't let it dim." I'd nodded, but I'd measured my worth by others' needs, and Saltwind was showing me that wasn't enough. I walked into town, the boardwalk warm under my sandals, the air carrying the faint scent of grilled fish from a seaside stall. The main street hummed softly, shopkeepers chatting, boats creaking, and I stopped at Sarah's bookstore, its shelves heavy with novels and sketchbooks. She'd become a friend, her kindness an anchor, and I bought a new pencil, its weight solid in my hand, a small claim to this new life. I thought of the gala, how my lesson plan sat untouched, my years teaching reduced to a quick, great party. I'd been invisible there. But here, with Sarah's nod and Amos's wave from the dock, I was starting to shine again. Not for them, but for me. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," Sarah said, arranging books, her salt and pepper braids swinging, her eyes sharp but kind. "Sorting through old things," I said, my voice soft, showing her my sketchbook. "Trying to find me." "The sea's good for finding," she said, her smile warm. "It shows you what's true." Her words settled like a soft tide, and I nodded, carrying the pencil back to my cottage. I sat on the porch, the sea's murmur steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. I opened my sketchbook and drew the bench, its wood worn but strong like the woman I was uncovering. I sketched James's letter, Sarah's words, the way the sea felt like a guide, leading me to question who I'd been. I'd spent decades being the anchor, teaching late, raising James alone after Robert, grieving quietly, thinking it was strength. But strength wasn't just giving, it was claiming myself too. Saltwind, with its waves and kind faces, was showing me I could be Helen, not just the roles I'd worn. I thought of James, his brief calls, his voice, polite but distant, and the gala, where my efforts were ignored. I'd poured my light into him, expecting it to reflect back, but it hadn't. The letter was a mirror, showing me the woman I'd been, playing with James on the beach, dreaming by the sea, and the one I'd become, dimmed by duty. I wasn't angry, not anymore. It was quieter, a resolve to find the Helen who could shine without needing others' eyes. Saltwind's bookstore, Amos's nets, my sketchbook, they were threads, weaving a life I chose. I walked to the shore, the sand soft under my feet, the waves curling gently now, their foam white and delicate. I thought of my mother again, how she'd sit by the sea saying, "Your heart's wide, Helen, but save some for you." I was saving it now, in these moments, sketching, noticing the dunes, talking with friends. Saltwind wasn't a cure, But it was a place to grow, to ask who I was when I wasn't giving. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer. Each line a step, each wave a whisper of truth. The stars began to show, sharp against the twilight, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. I opened my sketchbook again, the bracelet from Robert glinting, and wrote, "I'm finding her." The words felt like a promise, small, but fierce. The sea sang its endless song, and I smiled, ready to keep digging, to claim the woman I was meant to be. The Salt Wing Community Hall smelled of turpentine and canvas, its air warm and slightly sharp, with sunlight streaming through high windows, casting soft patterns on the scuffed wooden floor. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for 5 weeks, finding myself through Sarah's kindness, Amos's wisdom, and my sketches. But James's letter had pushed me to seek more, to claim my voice in a new way. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was tied back with a scarf, my green eyes focused, and I wore a cotton blouse under a soft cardigan, its sleeves dusted with paint, as I stood before a canvas, brush in hand. The retirement gala had shown me I had faded, and now joining this painting class, I was crafting not just art, but courage, shaping Helen into someone who could speak. The canvas was rough under my brush, the paint gliding in uneven strokes as I tried to capture the sea's shimmer, its blues and greens blending messily but true. The act felt like my sketchbook, a way to say I was here, not just the teacher who planned or the mother who gave, but Helen who could create. I thought of Robert, how he'd loved my old sketches, saying, "Your hands tell stories, Helen." I'd stopped telling stories after he died, too busy with James's needs, my students' essays. But here, with the paint's slick texture, I was finding them again. I thought of my mother, her hands weaving baskets by the sea, her voice saying, "Make something yours, Helen." This painting, flawed but mine, was a start. The class was small, a handful of locals chatting softly over their easels, their brushes dipping into jars of color. Sarah had mentioned it, her eyes bright, and I'd signed up, nervous but eager. I glanced around, seeing canvases of dunes, boats, lives, and felt a spark of belonging, not just to Saltwind, but to myself. I thought of the gala, how my lesson plans sat untouched, my years reduced to a quick, great party. I'd been invisible there, but here, with paint on my fingers and the sea's distant hum, I was visible, not to others, but to me. "Looking good," said June, the instructor, a woman in her 60s with cropped gray hair and a warm laugh, her apron streaked with paint. She leaned over my canvas, her hands steady. "It's a mess," I said, half laughing, my voice lighter, wiping paint from my hands. "It's a story," she said, her eyes kind. "That's where it starts." Her words settled like a soft wave, and I nodded, my brush moving again, feeling bolder. After class, I walked to the shore, the sand soft under my sandals, the air carrying the scent of salt and wild roses. The waves curled gently, their foam white and soft, and I carried my canvas, still wet, wrapped in cloth. I sat on a driftwood bench, its wood smooth, and opened my sketchbook, drawing the paint's colors, their vibrancy like the sea's light. I thought of James, his letters raw hurt, his calls still brief and cautious. I'd spent decades giving, teaching, raising, grieving, thinking it was enough.
But this painting class, like my sketches, was teaching me I could create for myself, could speak through color and lines. Back at the cottage, I set the canvas on the porch table, the sea's murmur steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. I opened my sketchbook and drew June's words, the paint's feel, the way the sea felt like a partner in my rediscovery. I thought of Robert again, how he'd loved my creations, calling them my sea light tales. I'd thought my tales were in giving, but now I saw they could be in making, in claiming my voice through each brushstroke, each line. I walked to the dock, the planks creaking, the air alive with the tang of fish and salt. Amos was there, mending nets, his nod quiet but kind. I showed him my sketchbook, the sea's waves bold on the page, and he chuckled, saying, "You're catching the sea's heart, Helen." His words warmed me like Robert's once did, and I felt a shift, a sense that I wasn't just the woman who had taught or mourned, but Helen, shaping her courage, speaking through paint. The stars came out, sharp against the night, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. Saltwind was more than a place now. It was a canvas with Sarah's warmth, Amos's wisdom, and this class weaving me into it. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer. Each creation a step toward the woman I was meant to be. The sea sang its endless song, and I smiled, ready to keep painting, to claim my light.
The Saltwind Cafe glowed with the warmth of hanging lanterns, their light soft on checkered tablecloths, the air rich with the scent of brewed coffee and warm cinnamon rolls, mingling with the faint salt from the sea outside. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for 6 weeks, finding myself through Sarah's kindness, Amos's wisdom, and my paintings. But today, James was coming to visit. Our first meeting since I'd left after my retirement gala. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was tied back with a scarf. My green eyes nervous but hopeful, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton dress, my hands fidgeting with the silver bracelet from Robert, its cool links grounding me. The gala had shown me I'd faded, and Saltwind had helped me shine. But facing James meant mending a bond strained by my giving and our distance. I sipped my tea, its warmth steadying me, and looked out the window, where the sea rippled under a gray sky, its waves calm but restless. James's letter found in the cottage had laid bare his hurt, how I'd given too much to my students, too little to him after Robert died. I thought I was being strong, teaching late, keeping our home steady, but I'd lost him in my rush to be everything. The gala, with its ignored lesson plans, echoed that loss. And now, with Saltwind's rhythm in my heart, I wanted to rebuild, not as the mother who gave, but as Helen, who could love honestly. The cafe door chimed, and James stepped in, his dark hair flecked with gray, his coat damp from drizzle, his blue eyes scanning until they found me. He was 40, his face lined but warm, his smile cautious, like he wasn't sure who I'd become. I stood, my heart quick, and we hugged, his coat cool against my arms. We sat, the table small between us, and I felt the weight of years, our beach days, my years of teaching, our silence after Robert's death, heavy but unspoken. "You look lighter," James said, his voice soft, stirring his coffee, his eyes on the mug. "Salt wind's changing me," I said, my voice steady but warm, touching the bracelet. "I needed to find myself." He nodded, his smile faint. "I wish you'd known you felt so lost." His words stung, but they were honest, and I leaned forward, ready to meet him halfway. We talked, slowly at first, the cafe's hum a gentle backdrop. I told him about the gala, how I felt invisible, my lesson plans untouched, my voice calm but raw. He listened, his eyes wide, and shared his own hurt, how my teaching felt like distance, how he'd grieved Robert alone. I thought of Robert, how he'd sit with us by the sea, saying, "Love means listening, Helen." I'd held too tightly to my role as provider, thinking it was love, but here, with the sea's rhythm outside, I saw I could love James differently, as equals, as family. We laughed, a soft sound, over memories of building sandcastles, and cried when we spoke of Robert, his absence a shared ache. I showed him my sketchbook, its pages filled with sea sketches and paintings, each a piece of the Helen I was finding. He traced a drawing of the dock, his smile small but real, and told me about his life, his job, his own quiet struggles, his regret for pulling away. The cafe grew quieter now, the air cooler, carrying the scent of rain and coffee, and I felt a bridge forming, fragile but strong like the bracelet's links. I wasn't erasing the years apart, but I was building something new, with James, with myself. We walked to the shore, the sand damp under our shoes, the waves soft now, their foam glowing in the dusk. I thought of the gala, how I'd waited for others to see me, and James's calls, his voice distant. I'd given too much, expecting him to fill the space Robert left. But Saltwind had taught me I could fill it myself, through painting, sketching, friends. James wasn't my light, but he was my son, and I loved him enough to let him be, to meet him as Helen, not just the giver. Back at the cottage, we sat on the porch, the sea's murmur steady, the air rich with salt and cedar. I gave him a small painting, a sea scene with uneven blues, and he held it, his eyes soft. I thought of Robert again, how he loved our sea talks, calling them our spark moments. I was making new moments now, with James, with myself. Salt wind wasn't a cure, but it was a place to mend, to build bridges, to shine. The salt wind shore shimmered under a late afternoon sun, its waves lapping gently against the sandy beach, their soft rhythm blending with the distant laughter of children chasing gulls near the dock. The air sharp with the scent of sea salt and blooming dune roses. At 62, I'd been in this coastal town for 2 months, weaving a new life through Sarah's warmth, Amos's wisdom, my paintings, and the mended bond with James, whose visit yesterday had left me lighter, whole in a way I hadn't expected. My auburn hair, streaked with white, was loose, catching the breeze, my green eyes bright with peace, and I wore a cotton dress under a soft cardigan, my hands holding a small painting of the sea, its blues shimmering like the water. The retirement gala had shown me I'd faded, but Saltwind had helped me claim my light, shining as Helen, a woman who chose herself. I walked along the shore, the sand cool beneath my bare feet, the sea's rhythm steady and soothing. I stopped by a small cove, its water clear, reflecting dune grass and tiny fish, and knelt, setting the painting against a smooth stone, its colors vivid in the sunlight. It was a gift to the sea, a way to say I was here, not just surviving but thriving. I thought of Robert, his voice calling me his sea light, and how I'd lost that light, giving too much to James, my students, and my grief. Saltwind had given it back through Sarah's smile, Amos's stories, James's laughter, my sketches and paintings. I'd come here unsure, but now, with the sea's gentle hum, I stood steady, my roots deep in this quiet town. I thought of my mother, how we'd sat by the sea, her voice saying, "You're enough, Helen, just you." I'd bloomed here in Saltwind's small moments, sketching waves, tasting scones, painting with June. The gala, with its ignored lesson plans, felt like a distant echo, its sting softened by this place. I'd been invisible there, but here, with paint on my fingers and the sea song in my ears, I was seen, not just by others, but by myself. I wasn't perfect, but I was whole, and that was enough. You're glowing today, Sarah said, joining me, her salt and pepper braid loose, her shawl fluttering, her smile warm as she walked from her bookstore. Feeling it, I said, my voice steady, standing to hug her. This place, it's home. The sea knew you belonged, she said, her eyes crinkling. We all did. Her words wrapped around me like a warm tide, and I smiled, my heart full. I walked to the dock, the planks creaking under my sandals, the air alive with the scent of fish and cedar. Amos was there, mending nets, his hands deft, his nod quiet, but kind. I opened my sketchbook, drawing the cove, its fish darting like thoughts, each line a thread in the life I'd built. I thought of James, how we'd laughed and cried, rebuilding our bond as family, not just memories. He'd left this morning, promising to visit again, and I'd felt peace, knowing I loved him without needing him to complete me. He'd called again today, his voice warmer, and I'd told him about the sea, my paintings, my new home. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's murmur soft, the air cooling with the scent of salt and cedar. I opened my sketchbook and drew the cove, its clarity like the Helen I'd found. I sketched Sarah's words, Amos's nod, the painting I'd left, each a stone in my foundation. Saltwind wasn't a cure, but a canvas where I'd painted a life. Paintings, sketches, friendships, a renewed bond with James. I thought of Robert again, how he'd called my moments by the sea my spark tales. That spark was mine now, not in giving, but in living, in choosing myself. The stars came out, bright against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. I looked at the sea, its waves endless, and felt whole, not perfect, but enough. To anyone listening, I'd say this: believe you're enough. Start over no matter your age. Share your story. Saltwind taught me it's never too late to choose yourself, to find your light and shine. I was Helen, and I was home.